Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder, to the ship review of the USS Pensacola CA-24, and also the first video of patch 1.93. First of all, sorry for the lack of videos over the past couple of days, but real life kind of asked for more time that it deserves. And also, I tried to really make the first video about the USS Pensacola, especially a review. But I came across a lot of the issues making this ship work and also look good. And also talking about making something look good that actually isn't. As you can see, it is now the 31st of October as I'm recording this review, and Gaijin tried to make the ship look scary. Lots of ships with the rails on fire and the ropes, etc. For me, it looks more like a, I don't know, Christmas gift present, whatever. And so also for the enemy, rather than being a scary threat, the USS Pensacola looks more like an RP and Silverline pinata, and so yeah, it's more like a gift to the enemy. Why that is, and why I had quite a bit of problem making this ship look good in battle, we'll see just after the 5-minute guide by Drachinifel, when I run down the statistics, and I also will talk about how to play the ship and what its strengths and weaknesses are. See you later in the harbor.
The Pensacola Class was the United States Navy's first try-at-a-cruiser built under the terms of the Washington Naval Treaty, and also the most heavily armed cruisers the modern USN had built by a fair margin. Although immediately prior to the treaty, Congress had been willing to throw almost unlimited cash at the naval construction effort, for most of the 20th century up to that point it had been a massive struggle to get so much as an extra dime for the naval budget. As a result, the Navy had been forced to make a choice. Did they want cruisers or battleships? Because they weren't going to get the money for both. As a result, the various standard classes had been built, but their escorts consisted of a small collection of old, slow, and obsolete armoured and protected cruisers of questionable value, with the 10 recent Omaha class being the only combat-capable ships able to even exceed 24 knots. With fast ocean-going destroyers and numerous fast and torpedo-armed cruisers serving in the fleets of various other major navies, this needed to change, and change quickly. With 8 boilers driving 4 propellers, with a combined output of just under 110,000 horsepower, these ships would be capable of over 32 knots. Not quite as fast as the Omahas, but infinitely more combat capable. However, as with practically every treaty cruiser, the combination of 10,000-ton weight limit and 8-inch main battery immediately started throwing up problems. The United States Navy was ahead of the other major navies in the development of triple turrets, and wanted to exploit this to fit the ships with a heavier main battery than the others, who had gone with twins. This latter choice limited a 4-turret ship to 8 guns, unless the nation in question wanted to go through the expense and weight increase of an entire extra turret. Instead, the Pensacolas, whilst still having 4 turrets, were to be armed with a total of 10 8-inch guns, 2 twins and 2 triples in super-firing pairs fore and aft. But to keep speed up and displacement down, the hull narrowed rapidly, and there was not the beam left to fit the heavier triple on the lower mount. As a result, a rather unusual arrangement of the twin turret being the lower turret and the triple super-firing over it was installed. The penalty to stability and displacement from the taller barbette was considered to be less than the penalty to speed and displacement from a wider hull. There was no dedicated anti-ship secondary battery, and the remaining armament consisted of 4 4-inch 25 caliber anti-aircraft guns, 2 47mm saluting guns, and 2 triple torpedo launchers, one on each side. Further weight-saving efforts were made on the hull, with welding as opposed to the more traditional riveting used, and a thin armour belt comparable to that found on 6-inch gunned light cruisers, which led to them initially being classified as light cruisers until 1931, when gun size became the determining factor. Two ships were built, the Pensacola and the Salt Lake City, before the Navy switched to the Northampton class. Due to the super-firing triple turrets and heavy tripod masts, the ships rolled considerably and needed modification throughout the 1930s to correct this. Both ships would receive extensive anti-aircraft refits during the war, finishing the war with extensive radar suites and additional anti-aircraft guns in the form of 28 40mm Bofors guns in quad mounts and 18 20mm Oerlikons in twin mounts on Pensacola, and 24 quad Bofors and 19 single 20mm Oerlikons on Salt Lake City. Both ships were part of the Pacific Fleet but on other duties at the time of Pearl Harbor, so were able to launch straight into combat operations. Pensacola herself served initially as a carrier guard, protecting variously Lexington, Enterprise, Yorktown and Hornet through multiple actions including the battles of Coral Sea, Midway and Guadalcanal, although her subsequent involvement in the surface action at the Battle of Tassafaronga was less successful, taking a torpedo hit and only making it back due to extremely skillful damage control by her surviving crew. After repairs, she rejoined a war where the tide had decisively turned and would spend more time on shore bombardment duties than carrier escort, although this still featured quite heavily in her role. She finished the war with the obligatory magic carpet trip before being used as a target in Operation Crossroads nuclear testing, then studied and then sunk as a target in 1948. Salt Lake City had a similar early career to her sister, but after Guadalcanal, her first foray into surface combat was somewhat more successful, helping sink a number of Japanese ships at the Battle of Cape Esperance, taking 3 significant hits in the process. After repairs, the tactically inconclusive but strategically successful Battle of the Komandorski Islands saw the ship crippled and back in dock again after having fought against significant odds. After this, she likewise resumed a career bombarding shore targets and escorting carriers, before likewise being used as a target for atomic bombs and then sunk as a target in 1948.
So now let's have a look at the Pensacola in port, and let's begin with the armor. Before we begin to go into the depths of the armor itself, let's go and use the new tool, which is the protection analysis. You can choose from any country, any ship at any rank, with any sort of its available ammunition, and choose just simply the various different distances, and then you can click on it. You can go to the side and watch the shell penetrate and just do its thing. This is very informative. You can test if you can penetrate the bow. One thing that is curious is that the shells seem to go through water, even the high explosive shells. I'm not quite sure what to think about this, but for example here you can see that the shell actually isn't able to penetrate the armor belt, and so you can see where you should actually hit with which ship and which ammunition type to go for the machinery and other parts of the ship like the magazines. So let's go back to the armor view, and we can see immediately that this ship doesn't really have a distributed armor scheme like the Admiral Hipper. So large portions of the bow section and also most of the rear section is mostly unprotected with external armor plating, meaning that this is really vulnerable to receive flooding even from destroyer HE hitting the waterline. Then where the turrets begin, we have the armored belt of 101.7mm at the front part and a 63.5mm bulkhead. That bulkhead isn't really that strong, so you cannot really angle all that much efficiently. Then we have also an inner bulkhead of only not even 32mm of armor, and the armor belt protecting the engine room is 76.3mm, so roughly 3 inches thick. And then, yeah, the rear has protection for the magazines of 89mm, but it's internal armor, and then a little bit of protection here for the rudder. The next thing is we have an upper armored belt, which is very interesting, 38.2mm. That's not even gonna really reliably protect from destroyer HE, but it is better than nothing, especially if you angle versus some patrol boat AP, if you will, but that's not really that scary for a cruiser to begin with. Then the deck is somewhere between 38 and only 25.4 millimeters thick. And this is setting the tone for the rest of the ship, because the bridge is highly vulnerable with only 32 millimeters of armor. You're gonna lose control over your ship a lot, and I mean it, a lot. And that's amplifying the problems with your turret armor. The barbettes and the ammunition elevators, not even 20 millimeters of protection, and there is barely any sort of external ammo or protection for those barbettes and ammo elevators. And then the turrets themselves, they gonna take splash damage, 19 and 38 millimeters of protection, and the front is 63.5. So you're not gonna lose the turrets as often heading the enemy or facing the enemy like on the Mogami, but when somebody switches to AP, they don't have any sort of protection at any given real distance. This protects from destroyer HE, but not really from cruiser size, you know, 6-inch, 8-inch HE shells effectively. So you're gonna lose your turrets as well. The firing arcs on them are okay-ish. They are better than pre-Mogami, pre 1.93 Mogami, shall I say, which now also got buffed with its turret firing angles. But you only have 4 of them, not 5 like the Mogami. And yeah, you mostly use the one at the top with the 3 barrels instead of the one with 2 barrels. We'll see later on why this is extremely painful for this ship, which is not even that painful for the Mogami, and that's already painful. So let's have a look at the X-ray, and we can see that the bow section and the stern section doesn't really have all that many interesting parts in it, so they are mostly empty. But then we come to the middle of the ship and we can see quite a lot of fuel tanks that are protected by the armor belt, but they catch fire anyway. And so a little trick is here: if you receive flooding, let your ship flood, but keep an eye on this and control the flooding. It's quite a lot of micromanagement. You can do this with all cruisers, and it suppresses the fire quite a lot, and that reduces crew damage also considerably. And so you have to take this into account. The funnels aren't really that massive compared to some other ships, and that is nice. Then we have also the ammo racks, and they are at the waterline slightly above, and also we have some very vulnerable ready ammunition racks, and so you can actually get ammo racked by destroyer HE. Yeah, destroyer base use HE will kill your ship if you are unlucky and you receive multiple hits here in this section. So as we can see, the bulkheads are weak. The side armor plating is not really that weak, but you cannot angle. There is no turtleback arrangement to catch the shrapnels like on the Hipper. You don't have distributed armor scheme like on the Hipper, which works in its favor in War Thunder, and you lose your turrets very often. And then your ammo racks are also quite exposed for both the front and the rear. However, we don't have any sort of secondary ammo racks for the heavy anti-aircraft guns. So now let's have a look at the statistics, and at first it actually looks pretty good, because the USS Pensacola together with the IJ and Mogami has the most amount of the biggest guns in War Thunder at the moment in patch 1.93. We are looking here at 10 8-inch or 203mm /55 Mark 14 guns. You have 120 rounds per gun. That's a bit less than with the Mogami, but it should be enough for most battles, and if you fired all your rounds, you probably dealt some significant damage. However, the Mogami got buffed this patch with better firing angles and also a buff to its reload down to 12 seconds. While this is good for the Mogami, giving it a DPM of 50, you're looking here on the Pensacola at a DPM of 30 because the reload is 20 seconds. That is awful. And you still retain the same problem that the Mogami has, that your barbettes and also your turrets get constantly knocked out, even by 6-inch cruiser high explosive spam. So you'd be lucky to retain those 30 shells per minute. So this is absolutely awful. While the Hipper also doesn't have the highest DPM, it at least sustains it because it has the barbette armor and the turret armor to rather rarely lose any sort of firepower. Now, the next tragedy is that the USS Pensacola has no torpedoes whatsoever. The Admiral Hipper's torpedoes are usable, as well as the Kirov's, but they don't have that many. If you then look at the farm fest that the IJN Mogami's 24 long lance torpedoes are, you kind of see where the Mogami has one of its redeeming factors. The other light cruisers, well, they just teach you a lesson in DPM, right? With the worst, the HMS Tiger, having 80, that's nearly 3 times as much DPM on a ship that only has 4 guns. The Chapayev also clocks in at 90, and then the USS Brooklyn, which also has a premium counterpart, the USS Helena, clocks in at an amazing 150 rounds. And this ship is actually the same battle rating, and you will face it constantly in naval forces with 5 times the DPM. And the shells on the USS Brooklyn, especially the high explosive ones, aren't really that bad either. And you are vulnerable to that kind of incoming HE fire even, because your turrets have that bad armor. So, no torpedoes, weak DPM, long reloads, lackluster armor, and still we get at 12,050 tons, and that is actually a mediocre displacement. The top speed with 60 kilometers per hour is on the lower end, but it's still nothing really bad. Most cruisers are somewhere at around this mark. The crew amount, however, is pretty low, with only 653. That is actually pretty bad. That is comparable with the Kirov, and so if you receive incoming fire and it bypasses your armor and it kills a significant amount of your crew, you're not left with that many men to seal the leaks, pump out the water, extinguish the fire, repair your turrets. It's a never-ending circle of bad arguments going into the description of this ship. So now let's have a look at the ammunition, and maybe that is a redeeming factor. We begin with the stock 8-inch Mark 14 common base use high explosive shell, and that shell is not really all that great. While base use HE shells look tempting in theory, delivering the damage deeper inside of the ship, you have to see that it doesn't really seem to work that way in War Thunder, and also nose fuse high explosive hitting the waterline where there is no armor, causing massive gaps where water gushes in and causing some significant flooding. The base use HE shell doesn't seem to work that way. We have a muzzle velocity of 853 meters per second, which is kind of average. There are ships that have a little bit worse, but it's definitely not excellent, but still it's workable. Then we also deliver only 4.84 kilograms of TNT equivalent inside of the enemy ship. And that is more like light cruiser level in terms of TNT equivalent, right? The most cruisers have even significantly more than this. Look at the Brooklyn, look at the Chapayev, HMS Tiger, 6-inch guns. They have more than that. And you only have 40 millimeters of blast penetration with this, so a lot of armor plating, especially at distance where the kinetic factor falls off, you just don't punch through the armor and you don't deliver the damage. Combine this with the lackluster DPM in the first place and also bad accuracy, you can see why this ship isn't really my favorite one in that aspect especially. The second shell type is the Tier 1 upgrade modification, which is the 8-inch Mark 19 Apc Armor-Piercing Shell, and it is of the APCBC variety. It has a muzzle velocity of 853 meters per second and delivers a very poor 1.62 kilogram TNT equivalent. If you compare this to a lot of the other ships, the ones with 8-inch have significantly more TNT filler by more than a kilogram mostly, and also have a higher DPM. And even some of the 6-inch cruisers deliver that kind of TNT filler, and even if they deliver just half it, you have to see those are 6-inch guns with a significantly higher DPM, especially again the USS Brooklyn. So the overall destruction delivery via this APCBC round is not really impressive. One funny side note though is that with 448 millimeters at 10 at 1,000 meters distance, we're actually having more penetration than the Admiral Hipper. And funnily enough, we achieved this here with this shell by less muzzle velocity and also a lighter shell. So okay, that's very interesting. At 10 kilometers though, the penetration falls up steeper than the Admiral Hipper ones, and so the Admiral Hipper at the usual combat distances deliver a better penetration with more alpha strike and better DPM, just to set the things in tone. And that's a ship at the same battle rating a rank lower, so I'm not quite sure why this ship sits at rank 5 at all. Probably just to make up rank 5 and just to sell some premium ships, whatever. But that aside, yeah, the alpha strike isn't really all that great. You have to deliver a direct strike on the ammo rack to deliver any sort of significant damage. Combine this with the lackluster DPM that quickly gets reduced even further, and you can see also that shell isn't all that great. With a tier 2 upgrade, we're looking at the 8-inch Mark 25 HC, and that is the second base use HE shell. We have the same muzzle velocity of 853 meters per second, and now we are getting some interesting numbers. We're delivering a TNT equivalent of 9.3 kilograms, and that makes a whole lot difference. The penetration value goes up in terms of the raw blast from 40 to 62 millimeters, and we retain the same kinetic factor. That means that you deliver more or less twice the damage to the ship with this upgraded base use HE shell. But again, I would love to see a nose use HE shell just for the sake of it. With the current game mechanics, that seems to work better, but that delivers more damage. It's not really that outstanding when it comes to the damage on cruisers, but versus destroyers this should deal significant damage, and it does. But again, combine it with the lackluster DPM and the reduced accuracy, and you're not really hitting that undamaged compartment, and it takes a painfully long time. And if that destroyer captain loads AP, he can again disable your turrets, and then you're down to your secondaries. Finally, as the last shell type for the main batteries, we have the 4th shell type as a tier 4 upgrade, and this is the semi-armor-piercing ballistic cap 8-inch Mark 17 SC shell. It also travels at a muzzle velocity of 853 meters per second. More importantly, it delivers now a worthy 4.61 kilograms TNT equivalent. That is roughly the region of the stock base use HE shell, but still we have some mighty penetration values of 374 millimeters at point blank range and at 1,000 meters of 205 meters. That is workable, that delivers the pain. That is probably with the tier 2 upgraded base use HE the best combination, this shell and also the base use HE shell, the upgraded one, but still the DPM is lackluster. So I think that if you, for example, look at the Kirov, that delivers like 11-12 kilograms of TNT filler with its semi-armor-piercing shell and has a higher DPM, you kind of see where this is going. Now, I am absolutely not a fan of this ship's overall main battery firepower. A final note again to the secondaries, because their redeeming factor is that for those 5-inch 25 Mark 13 AA cannons, you have quite a lot of ammunition. You have overall 8 single mounts, so they don't get knocked out that much, 4 per side, and they're shooting as a tier 3 upgrade the 5-inch Mark 28 AAC VT variable time fuse or proximity fuse shell, so your long range AA aura is actually respectable, and that is one redeeming factor. The rest of the ship's AA though is not really that impressive, because it is 2 quadruple 1.1 inch or 28 millimeter gun mountings, and then also 4 single 50 cals. That's not really gonna cut it if somebody tries to sneak around an island with an aircraft and just YOLO torps you or YOLO bombs you. And so this is the USS Pensacola. So the question is how to play it then. In typical glass cannon fashion, you try to stay out of harm's way, you never try to get shot, and that means making yourself a rather unattractive target by angling away, by increasing the distance, and using the long-range capabilities of your gun. Again, the lackluster DPM, the lack of armor on the turrets, and your vulnerability to fires and flooding, etc. make this ship overall a very easy target to disable. To actually get sunk, aside from an ammo rack, isn't actually that easy to achieve, but it's not really difficult either. There are definitely ships that are much tankier, but there are, in terms of getting overall wrecked, ships that are worse. But again, you just can't shoot at the enemy, and sometimes I had the case that all 4 of my guns were knocked out, and then I had to go back to the secondaries. So this ship is problematic in many cases. Don't think that this is an easy ship to play. You lose many games because you cannot push for the objective. Either you get wrecked or you stay at long range. You cannot go for the caps. And you can eventually win a game. But it's very difficult to actually whittle down the enemies fast enough because your DPM is that low, combined with, again, I repeat myself, the guns getting knocked out, and also the accuracy being not point blank accurate like on some other ships where you get more hits in. So overall, this ship isn't really satisfying to play. It has its issues, but it's not really worthless. It's not really extremely slow. It doesn't have extremely bad armor, and the anti-aircraft long-range battery is actually quite okay. But the main guns, man, are they disappointing. And with having said that, that's it for me today with this ships review. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you enjoyed the 5-minute guide by Drachinifel. If so, again, the link to his awesome YouTube channel is in the video description down below. Please give this video a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this ship. And as usual, we will see each other on the battlefields, in the skies, and on the waves of War Thunder.